Okay, in this lesson, we're going to have a look at this exam question, which focuses on the impacts of an international migration that you will have studied. And those impacts have to refer to both the donor country, which in this case is the country which people are leaving, and the receiving country, which is the country they're going to. Now, when I go through this answer in a second, I'm going to emphasize more than 4 points for each because this is an 8-mark question. And if you encountered this question, you'd probably do a range of factors to do with donor and receiving, which would add up to at least 8 points. However, this question can be just focused on either the donor or the receiving, and the question could be anything from 6 to 8 marks. So actually, you do need to make sure you have quite an extensive detailed knowledge on the impact of that international migration on the donor and the receiving. Now, the case study I'm going to look at is a migration flow between Poland and the United Kingdom. And the reason for that is it's one of the largest migration flows to have impacted both on Poland and on the United Kingdom in recent years. So I'm going to start off by looking at the impact on Poland, which on this map is located here. So how has Poland been impacted? Well, there's a range of things you want to talk about. The first one is the fact that Poland has lost hundreds of thousands, as a matter of fact, in this case, millions of young adults primarily to surrounding countries, especially to the United Kingdom. Now, the impact this has is that these young adults are often working professionals who would be generating high levels of income in Poland and therefore keeping the economy going by both spending that money. And therefore, there's a lot less money being spent in Poland because these people are living abroad. Furthermore, as they are no longer working in Poland, they're not paying tax revenues in Poland, which is having an impact on the Polish economy because the government has less money to then spend on other things because it's getting less taxes. Another problem is that many trades jobs remain undone, and there is a shortage of people like plumbers and builders in Poland to do those sorts of work because they're living abroad working in places like London. And this makes it more difficult for building companies to hire people, for example, and leads them having to look abroad to bring people into Poland to fill those jobs. Now, you can then link this because to an additional point, and be very clear that you're making an additional point, because they have to bring in people to fill the jobs that they can no longer fill with Poles, it's leading to a lot of tension between local communities and people coming in from surrounding countries like Hungary and Bulgaria and Romania to do those jobs, and local Polish communities aren't necessarily happy with that, which is leading to, in some cases, violence, or at the very least, levels of tension between the different communities. One final issue to do with the lack of workers is that many of the highest skill jobs, like in medicine, don't get done because a lot of medical professionals are going to the UK in search of the higher wages there. That means that hospital services and care services remain unfilled, and it's actually impacting potentially on people's health because their healthcare system isn't operating as effectively as it used to when it had much higher levels of people to recruit from for it. What other areas is Poland being affected? Well, the loss of these younger adults is leading to a drop in birth rates because these people are living abroad. So there are less children. So in the future, there's going to be even more of a shortage of workers because the birth rates right now are very low. It's also meaning that a number of schools at the youngest age groups, especially in nursery and primary, no longer have the numbers of students that used to be in them. So it's affecting closures of these particular educational establishments, which is leading to teacher unemployment. Another problem is that because there are less people in their late teens and early 20s who are moving abroad to work rather than go to university, universities are struggling to recruit the numbers of people, and that's impacting on the numbers of departments that can remain open and the numbers of university lecturers that are employed, leading furthermore, in this case, to unemployment. Other problems Poland's experiencing is that a number of families are split in these migrations. And the reason for that is that often one or both adults will leave to work abroad and send money back to the children who remain in Poland, either staying with a single parent or with grandparents. That means children are often growing up without one or both parents, which influences both their mental health in the future, but also influences their educational attainment and motivation because they don't have their parents around. Another linked problem to that is because there are lots of older people, grandparents, having to look after the younger communities, That's putting pressure on them uh, because they would normally be retired at this stage of their life, but now they're having to be carers. And that's having an effect on both their physical health and their mental health. Now, it's not all negative. There are positives of this migration. First of all, a lot of money is flowing back to the UK, back to Poland from the UK. And that means that a lot of people living in Poland who've remained receive money from their family member who lives abroad, and they can improve the quality of their life, sometimes building housing or spending more money in Poland, which helps furthermore stimulate the economy because now there's more money coming in from abroad. A second positive outcome is that many of the migrants do indeed actually return home back to Poland eventually, and they return back to Poland with more skills than when they left, which is helping increase the number of skilled people in the economy. And that's something that's been seen very recently in Poland. So that's a very detailed outline of Poland. Now see if you can write down how the UK's been impacted before I tell you, and then see if my points that I'm going to outline match some of them that you've maybe made. Now, the impact on the UK, which is the receiving country, has been, generally speaking, quite positive. First of all, we have allowed many of our unfilled jobs, our less desirable jobs, have been able to be filled by these migrants. And certainly that was the case up until the UK left the European Union. Many of these jobs, for example, waste disposal, now can get done by people from abroad who are willing to do those sorts of jobs. Second positive factor is because these people are willing to work often for lower wages. That helps boost businesses because they can hire these people at relatively lower wages. And certainly that's an advantage seen in the agricultural sector. A third advantage can be seen in the healthcare sector, where many Polish doctors have been recruited to work in our hospitals, where there has been a shortage of doctors for a while. So we're using Poland as an as an area to get a skilled workforce from. An additional advantage for the United Kingdom of receiving these high levels of migrants is that they generally pay far more tax into the economy than they take out through their use of services. And there's a significant difference in the amount of money they're putting in through taxes to what they're getting back. So they contribute to our economy, which gives the government more money to use for other particular things. However, there have been some disadvantages. First and foremost, in areas where they settle in large numbers, for example, in inner city London, that's led to increasing the problem of overcrowding in housing, especially as many of them often will share flats in large numbers. The linked problem to overcrowding in housing is the fact that that then causes rents to start to rise across the city for everyone living there because there's an increased demand. And that has an effect on everybody. Another disadvantage is an increased amount of workers puts a pressure on native workers who are potentially getting their costs undercut and losing business to workers from abroad. Now, you can link this to another point where you can say this increases tensions between the communities, where a number of the native populations who have been established for a long time resent the Poles who are arriving because they're perceived as working for lower wages or potentially undercutting their prices that they're trying to sell their services for. And that those tensions, certainly, if we want to develop this point further, were part of what fueled the Brexit debate, which led to the United Kingdom leaving the European Union in 2016, because large numbers of people were persuaded that the impact of migrants was overall negative. And that had political consequences, because leaving the European Union then meant that the freedom of travel within the European Union to both travel and work became more restricted as a consequence, affecting young people and older people alike. One final consequence that's more negative is that in urban areas, especially with high numbers of young Poles going on to have children and settling in the UK, that's putting pressure on educational services who are finding often schools are overcrowded because of the number of migrants choosing to live in those areas who are then having children. Okay, it's well worth revising a very detailed response to both impacts on donor as well as impacts on receiving, in reference in this case to Poland and the UK, and you'd want to start off your answer by clearly referencing the case study that you are talking about.